76% of startups are going to fail even after they find product market fit within 3 years. They had their perfect product, users loved it, even investors were lined up. But then silence. We treat product market fit like crossing the finish line. We build something people want, get those first passionate customers, and then think we made it. But here's what most founders discover often far too late. Product market fit isn't the finish line. It's the starting line. And what happens after that is going to determine whether you'll be building the next unicorn or be writing a postmortem shortly after. Personally, I've watched dozens of startups fail from the inside out, not because their ideas were wrong, but because of these invisible fault lines that under pressure started to crack. And today I want to walk through the 3 hidden killers that destroy even the most promising startups after they found product market fit and how to avoid them. We have what I like to call the post-PMF survival triangle. And essentially what that is people, operations, and customer experience. People are the right people in the right seats? And are they aligned around clear roles and culture? Operations do you have the decision-making processes and ownership structures in place to scale beyond the founding team? Meaning, do you have a way of deciding between A and B at a rapid rate that can scale? And does every task have an owner? And does every owner know what they are assigned to in terms of tasks? And then customer experience. That is the entire customer journey from the moment they are sold to and they sign on the dotted line to them being advocates of the product. Is that entire journey intentionally designed? Most founders are product obsessed, and rightfully so. They realize operations matter far too late, and they often treat customer experience as an afterthought rather than a strategic advantage. So we're going to break down each pillar and take a look at how they silently kill otherwise promising startups. So first, we're going to be on people. This is the foundation that determines everything else. And what we commonly see first as an issue that founders go through is hiring for the unknown. Are they hiring for the job title, or are they hiring to solve a specific problem? This is a common trap that most founders fall into, and what this ends up leading to is endless debates about direction that never leads to any action. An example that we can look at is Better.com. They rapidly expanded their team from 1,500 to 10,000 employees shortly after securing, I believe it was $750 million in funding. But without clear roles and problem focus, they later had to conduct multiple mass layoffs, including the infamous Zoom call that led to 900 people being let go. And the lesson there is that funding triggers hiring, but without problem clarity, those hires often solve the wrong challenges. So a simple test that anyone can do is, if I were to tell you that your company's survival depended on your next hire, who would you bring in, and what exact problem would they solve on day one? Another common issue that you'll see is founder dynamics. And what that looks like is, as your team grows from yourself to 2 to 3 to 10, founder roles have to fundamentally transform. And there's 2 deadly extremes that I've seen. The first is the founder bottleneck. Every single decision, from pricing strategy all the way down to snacks in the office, returns back to the founder or CEO. The team waits, and then momentum dies. The second is the founder drop-off. The CEO will step away too soon, assuming others will magically fill that leadership vacuum that they leave behind. And a common pattern you'll see in the industry is the following. So like in the SaaS world, a lot of teams will disagree on, let's say, their fundamental strategy, but then they'll continually postpone making those decisions. And this pattern is repeated across dozens of startups, and this pattern is seen across dozens of startups. When the decisions such as pricing start to linger in limbo, the sales teams lose confidence, prospects sense uncertainty, and then deals evaporate. And the data shows startups with decision timelines exceeding 2 weeks see 30% lower close rates. So a simple test here is to ask yourself, if you disappeared for a week without any warning, not like any planned vacation, what 3 critical functions would completely grind to a halt? And then you want to go ahead and solve for those. In another video, I'm going to walk through people on its own and give you some frameworks and strategies towards how you can solve a lot of these issues. But for today, just ask yourself this question and see what you come up with. And then lastly, you have cultural misalignment. Culture isn't like a fuzzy concept that you can just put on your About Us page. By the time you hit 15 people, and I would argue probably even 10 or 12, the implicit norms have already been hardened into unwritten rules. So, for example, working styles, fast and messy versus methodical, already been decided by this point. Communication, written documentation versus spontaneous conversations. Again, by this point, already decided. And the values, customer obsession versus technical excellence versus growth at all costs, already decided. And what this leads to is Just dreaded meeting after meeting after meeting where the real decisions will happen. And what you'll see is an example of this is with Zappos. So after Amazon acquired Zappos, both companies claimed to be customer obsessed, and they were. But their approaches were vastly different towards how they made decisions and how they went about autonomy. So a simple test here is, can every person on your team describe your culture in three specific non-generic principles that actually guide daily decisions? And if they can't, you want to figure it out as soon as possible. So the next pillar I want to talk about is operations. Even with great people in place, like we already discussed, they can still crash and burn if the right decision-making frameworks aren't put into place, which is essentially operations. So we're going to walk through three of the most common pitfalls here. The first one being decision debt and velocity. So what that looks like is, every startup is going to accumulate hundreds of decisions, big or small, but without any clear ownership over those decisions, these pile up like toxic debt. So the first one that you see is consistent overload, which is minor tweaks requiring full team approval all the time. Diffuse ownership, which is everyone assumes someone else will decide the issue, and then no escalation path where conflicts have nowhere to go for resolution if it can't be resolved where they start. And the danger here is that when the median decision time takes about 7 days or more, it starts to become a bit dangerous. When they pass 14, things become very critical. So what you want to do here is just ask yourself, how many of your top 10 roadmap items are currently waiting on leadership approval and for how long? And be honest with yourself. Like, even if you have mentally approved something or told your team that I'm going to approve it, it's not that stamp of approval that they need to move forward. So when you walk through this, ask yourself, again, what are the top 10 that you have that are still pending your decision and for how long? The second common thing you'll see here is the hero founder trap. So what that is founders will often revert to superhero mode, diving into every technical decision, customer call, HR issue, and then create this massive bottleneck. And what that looks like is, you have founders showing 14-hour days and then the team with a lot of idle time. And a pattern that I've seen is what I'm going to call the founder dependency syndrome, where the CEO or founder remains deeply embedded in day-to-day operations long after the company should have built systems to handle routine tasks. And that's tricky to balance because you don't really know when to leave, which is the challenge, and when to give your team more responsibility and authority. But a typical scenario you'll see is, a founder will continue handling support tickets for special clients when there's no need, creating both the bottleneck and preventing the support team from developing their own capabilities and scaling up that function as a whole. And this correlates directly towards them not having time to do things such as fundraising. And when that founder doesn't have the bandwidth to handle those more strategic activities, it holds back the company tremendously. So again, a test here is, what percentage of day-to-day operational tasks still require direct involvement? Which three could you delegate this week? The next one is process scaling. And what that is, oftentimes early success relies on the heroics of the founder, but what got you to 10 customers won't get you to 100. What that looks like is every new client implementation feels like you're building a custom product from scratch. And a good example here is HubSpot, which they've shared publicly also, that their early onboarding experiences were completely inconsistent. Each customer success manager had their own approach, and then this, of course, resulted in a lot of unpredictable outcomes. It wasn't until they standardized this process that their churn rate stabilized. Because if you don't have a process in place, churn will grow out of control here. And this is a pattern that we also see repeatedly. Inconsistent processes lead directly to inconsistent results. So the test here is, do you have a documented, tested playbook for your 5 most repeatable processes? So the last pillar I want to discuss is customer experience. This is the final pillar and often the most neglected. This is the true test of whether your product creates lasting value or just temporary interest. And the first one that we commonly see is acquisition versus activation. You can drive traffic through marketing spend all day long, but if users don't experience meaningful value within minutes, they're going to leave. And what that looks like is, impressive download numbers, sign up numbers, but very poor daily active usage. And a real world example of that is if you take a look at Clubhouse, they made news, back during the pandemic where they had 9.6 million customers in February 2021, but they lost nearly 90% within weeks. Of course, you can blame market environments for that and the times that we were in, but what you can also say is there was no structured onboarding, no clear, aha moment that was engineered into the experience, and no path to consistent value delivery across majority of their customers. So, a test here for that would be, ask yourself, what's your time to value? How many minutes or clicks until a brand new user reaches their first meaningful success moment. And then once you figure that out, can you cut that time in half? So the next one here is ownership retention. And what I want to ask you is something that stumps a lot of founders is, who on your team wakes up every morning obsessed with retention metrics? Win the bet, it's nobody. And for most startups, that's the honest answer. Or it's the founder by default sometimes. But whether it's nobody or the founder, both are a recipe for disaster. What that leads to is a lot of reactive support and no proactive outreach or health monitoring of your customers. An example of that is, Evernote. One of their former CEOs, I believe, was Phil Libin, even publicly mentioned that they discovered that 40% of their users weren't using the core note syncing functionality. Their main value prop, 40%, were not even using it. And they only realized this after implementing, feature tracking. They didn't have that to start off with. And by the time they addressed it, they had already lost a significant amount of market share to competitors like OneNote and Notion. So this scenario actually happens a lot for a lot of companies with successful products. They only have things such as feature tracking or understanding what their customers are doing with their product. They kind of just settle at, they're signed up, they're paying monthly, they're using it. We're good there. So a test you can do here for yourself is who owns retention in your startup, like we just asked. Once you figure that out, and once you decide who to put in that ownership position, are they then going to be empowered with the data and resources and authority to make those improvements? Authority is a clear one. A lot of times we can give our team those resources that they need to do their job, but when it comes to making that decision, are they actually empowered to do so? And the last one here is journey design versus ad hoc support. I like to say this to a lot of people. Customer experience isn't just about answering support tickets. It's about designing an intentional path from first touch for that customer to them then becoming evangelists of your product. And what that looks like when that's not happening is customers are consistently going to fall through the cracks between sales handoff and onboarding and then ongoing support. Something that I've seen a lot happen at a lot of startups is they'll fall into what I like to call the sales to success gap, where these customers experience a highly attentive sales process, but then fall into a void after they sign on the dotted line. The handoff between those teams is rarely designed intentionally. A lot of times, just an email that just happened in the spur of the moment. The data here actually shows that 60% of early customer churn is accounted for in a shaky handoff process. Again, not because the product was poor or they didn't do what they needed it to do, but because the process from when they signed to when they're onboarded was shaky. So a test here for you to try out is, could your first 100 users tell the same coherent story about their onboarding experience? Or would they each describe a completely different product? Now, of course, the answer here is going to be no, but how far is everyone's known from one another? Are they wildly different experiences from one another? Or are they just a bit off from one another? And again, be honest with yourself and uncover that. And I think you're going to find a lot of details there as far as how you can improve your onboarding process to then stabilize your churn. So to bring it all together, you have people, operations, and customer experience. People is aligning roles around the problem, clarifying founder dynamics, and intentionally shaping culture before it shapes you. Operations is building decision velocity, escaping that founder bottleneck, and then documenting repeatable processes that scale beyond just the founder's efforts. And then lastly, customer experience. Are you able to engineer those activation moments? Are you able to assign clear retention ownership? And are you able to design the entire journey from when that customer is just a stranger to them becoming an advocate of your product or service? I like to say that startups start with people, they've scaled operations, and they survive through customer experience. Of course, there's a lot of other variables involved, but I believe that these three are probably the most foundational for those companies, especially those that have a great product. And making sure you have these three things intact can make sure that even with a great product, you're able to scale and survive. If your startup feels stuck right now, resist the instinct to blame your product. Look at these three pillars, and I guarantee you the cracks are hiding in there. In the next three videos, I'm going to dive deeper into each of these ones separately and provide more tactical approaches and share some of the playbooks that I've developed over the past that I found success with when working with companies with that product market fit. But for now, I hope that these questions help you spot your hidden vulnerabilities before they become fatal. And remember, product market fit isn't the finish line. It's just the permission to run the real race. Before I go, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Zubeir Said, and I'm a startup veteran. I've been at startups for the past 5 to 6 years, the ones that are B2B SaaS, fintech, AI, done so in the capacity of CX, operations, and talent. And the reason why I made this video is because I wanted to share what I've seen be the silent killers of a great startup and show that even if you have the best product in the world, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a great company or even a good one at all. If you made it this far, you probably have a small business or startup of your own. Think about starting one very soon, or you just like learning about them. Ultimately, my goal in this channel is to do two things. The first is to discuss AI, but in a unique way. Ultimately, what I want to do is show you how to uncover your AI strategy, go through, learn how to use different tools, and figure out how you can even use AI tools to create whole new AI businesses. The second one is more what we discussed in this video today, how people, operations, and customer experience are the foundation of any great company, and how if you're able to improve those three things, you can go a lot farther than you previously once imagined. One thing I want to do with this channel is make sure I provide value before asking for anything in return. So if you ever feel like you've seen otherwise, I invite you to check me. Yeah, thanks for watching and stay curious.